The White House ousted all 3 sitting members of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission on Thursday, hamstringing the bipartisan agency ahead of the midterm elections. All right, so just a little bit of context into what the Election Assistance Commission actually is. It was created in 2002 with the Help America Vote Act, which was signed into law by, at the time, President George Bush. It was created in the wake of the very controversial and contested 2000 election between Al Gore and George Bush, which came down to a recount in Florida over a couple of specific districts. There was the whole hanging Chad controversy, and the recount of those counties arguably came down to some very specific and controversial details surrounding how these ballots were drafted and produced. It highlighted some inconsistencies in the way that elections are administered around the country and brought to issue questions of fairness and nonpartisan administration of these elections. So Congress in 2002 came together and created this Election Assistance Commission. Now, the role of this commission isn't the administration of federal elections, because that's squarely in the hands of the states. For federal elections, when it comes to voting for Senate members, House of Representative members, and for the presidency, for the general election, administration of those elections are squarely within the hands of the states themselves. And that's why you see such variance over voter ID laws, how far in advance you need to be registered to vote, how many polling locations are available to people, mail-in ballots, are they allowed? Under what conditions are you allowed to mail in vote? Are you allowed to register to vote by mail? All of these things are left entirely up to the states, and the Constitution is pretty clear about that. That's why this whole Save America Act that Donald Trump has been trying to pass recently is so problematic, is because it is definitely a constitutional overstepping by the federal government. So this commission is a 4-member panel, and this was intended to be an independent agency, meaning like it wasn't supposed to be really messed with by the president, who is the head executive, who typically has some amount of control about appointing members or the heads of certain executive government agencies. And while this is technically an executive agency, it's designed to be independent from influence from the presidency. The board is required to have no more than 2 members from a specific party on the board at a single time. So it's a 4-member panel. They can't just have 3 Republicans or 4 Republicans or 3 Democrats or 4 Democrats. At maximum, they can only have 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. When there is a board vacancy, the president nominates a new member, and the member needs to be approved by the Senate by at least a majority vote. And because the way they fill vacancies is through a president nomination and Senate approval, that's why having these rules about no more than 2 members from each party on the commission at one time is so important. And that essentially is the main thing that keeps it nonpartisan, because it ensures that you can't just have like a Republican president and a Republican Senate and then just fire all the Democratic commissioners and then put in a full panel of 4 Republicans, or vice versa. If you have a Democratic president, Democratic Senate, they can't just fire all the Republicans and put in 4 Democratic commissioners on the panel. The commission needs at least 3 sitting members at one time to be able to do official business, to have what's called a quorum. If they have 2 or less members sitting on the board at one time, because 2 spots are vacant or more, then the board basically doesn't exist and it can't do anything. It doesn't have any power, doesn't have any authority, and is not allowed to make any rules or issue grants or do whatever it does. However, there's also no requirement in the bill that created this commission, that says the president must fill vacancies. The president can choose to leave spots vacant for as long as they so choose. So if a commission member dies or retires or resigns or whatever it may be, the president can just choose for as long as they want to not nominate somebody and then leave those spots vacant. And if it gets to the point that, like I said, if there's only 2 spots filled or less, then the board is basically dissolved and doesn't exist anymore. I mean, it does still exist. Like if you fill those spots up, then the board would have authority again, but it doesn't have any authority when it doesn't have that many people on the panel at one time. The Democratic commissioners, Thomas Hicks and Benjamin W. Hovland, were fired by email. Republican Commissioner Christy McCormick received a call and was asked to resign. They will be replaced, said a White House official who confirmed that all 3 commissioners are gone. Presidential appointments to the EAC are subject to Senate confirmation, by no means a quick process. So before Trump just a couple of days ago fired all 3 remaining members of the panel, there was 4 members up until a year ago, or up until earlier this year, when Don Palmer resigned, who was one of the 2 Republican members, so there was only 2 Democratic sitting members and 1 Republican member. The EAC is a bipartisan commission that helps state and local officials run elections, certifying election equipment, and working with other agencies to ensure state and local elections run smoothly. From 2018 to 2025, it distributed more than $1 billion in grants for election security, according to the Bipartisan Policy Center. So as far as I understand, this $1 billion in grants for election security included things like polling worker training, recount training, voting equipment, safety security checks, basically the exact kind of things that you would want to have happening, right? It's truly an independent bipartisan agency whose entire purpose is ensuring that elections are administered as fairly and as as nonpartisan as possible around the country and helps provide resources through grants to help make that a reality. Now, if Mr. Donald Trump, who's all Mr. Election Security and all Mr. Oh, there's so much voter fraud going on, why would he go about firing the members of the commission and dissolving its power? It's not a coincidence this is happening just a couple of months before the midterms, okay? They surely have no intention of filling these spots before the midterms actually takes place. The answer is obvious, okay? It's because everything Donald Trump says about those kinds of things is complete nonsense, okay? He wants to pull some shenanigans come the midterms because he sees the writing on the wall. Because polling has not been great for him and the Republicans overall, that people are not terribly happy with how they've been running the country, with how things have been going with the Iran war and inflation and cost of living crisis, gasoline prices, ICE nonsense. So they're pulling out all the stops to try and gain as much of an advantage as possible come the midterms, and they're not afraid to go low. That's for sure. Now, I'm not trying to give bad people good ideas, but there's no specific language in the way that this agency or commission was created that says it needs to be 2 Democratic members and 2 Republican members. It just says no more than 2 members from a specific party. So with a Republican majority in the Senate and a Republican president, I don't know necessarily what would be stopping them from appointing 2 Republican commissioners and then maybe 2 Libertarian Party commissioners that may not be perfectly aligned with Republican interests, but are going to be far, far closer to Republican interests than maybe 2 Democratic commissioners would be, and maybe more willing to engage in some shenanigans than 2 Democratic commissioners would be. They're going to be more sympathetic in trying to help stack the deck in favor of Republicans than Democrats. The EAC, he said, has acted as a clearinghouse, sharing best practices between states and helping them use their limited resources to run elections. Taking away a key federal agency designed to help state and local election administrators will have a negative impact, Hovland said. Well, a negative impact on like election integrity and fairness in terms of like the average American voter, but it's going to have a positive effect for Republicans in the Trump administration because it's going to give them more runway to try and pull some ridiculous shenanigans. When you're asking more and more of people without giving them the necessary resources, you know mistakes happen. And so there's this risk of like self-fulfilling prophecies in that way, he said. It feels much more like a death of 1,000 cuts situation than there's one particular thing that you're concerned about. The commission normally has 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. One Republican, Don Palmer, resigned this year, leaving it with just 3 members. But as I said before, they still have a quorum with 3 members, so they could still conduct business and administer grants and help with election integrity and whatnot. One of the sources familiar with the firings said of the White House's actions, "It's purely political and will throw the country into chaos to not have a functioning commission 4 months before the midterm elections." That's what I'm saying. It's not a coincidence whatsoever that they're doing this 4 months before the midterms election. At the same time that the Trump administration has been trying to strong arm the Save America Act through, which will severely restrict mail-in voting all around the country in ways that's objectively anti-constitutional. Adrian Fontes, Arizona's Democratic Secretary of State, said in a statement that it was irresponsible and dangerous that this administration remains dead set on causing chaos for our election officials across the country. They want the chaos, okay? The more chaos there is, the less election integrity there is, the more people they can dupe into believing nonsense like the election was stolen, like there was tremendous amounts of fraud that flipped whole counties or states or whatever, whenever they don't get favorable results come this midterms, or looking even further ahead, come the general election in 2028. The panel was left without commissioners for 3 years starting in December 2011. So there is some precedent for this kind of thing, but as far as I understand, those commissioners weren't all fired at once, but I'm not 100% certain about that. I'll put yes or no on the screen right now. So yeah, this alongside him trying to strong arm the Save America Act through, and also him ordering the acting postmaster general to not deliver mail-in ballots in states that don't have certain voter registration requirements met, and a few other things all signal to me that they are very clearly going to try and pull at least a little bit of shenanigans come this midterms. But I think an even bigger question is come the general election in 2028, because I think it's entirely possible that 2028 sets up to be a very close election. There are no particularly good-looking Democratic candidates next in line, really. Even somebody like Gavin Newsom, who on paper is a decent candidate and has that kind of charisma factor, at least a little bit, certainly more than somebody like Vance. The Republican project of vilifying California and really anything left-wing, I think is going to be a big tainting factor to a Newsom campaign. The fact that he is associated with California, I think is going to, for mostly bad reasons, put push a lot of people away from voting for him. They're going to argue things like, oh, you don't want the United States to become like California or whatever, right? Look, California is like a war zone. It's such a bad place, even though it's the largest economy in the country. And there are plenty of, just like any place, right? There's lots of good things about California and there's lots of bad things about California. There's lots of good things about Texas. There's lots of bad things about Texas. Okay. I just hear this sentiment going around more and more, this sort of like this vilification of California and anything associated with it. And so I just have a feeling we're setting up for some sort of like Vance v. Newsom election in 2028 that's going to be extremely close. And it very well could come down to the wire, potentially involving a recount, and not having an acting election assistance commission board at that time is one of those factors that might be the difference maker when it comes to deciding who actually comes out on top. This is also one of those things, alongside a whole bunch of other things this administration has done, where like I just have a hard time coming up with any real good faith reasoning behind it. Some things, sure, maybe you can make a good faith reasoning behind, even if the reasoning is kind of poor, but this one is just like, there's no evidence that the Election Assistance Commission has done anything but positively impact the election integrity across the country. And so the idea that you're going to fire all 3 of its acting members and deny it a quorum literally like 3 months before the administration of midterms, at the same time you're doing a bunch of other screwy nonsense, like I said, trying to strong arm the Save America Act through, or commanding your postmaster general to not deliver mail-in ballots under certain circumstances in certain states. It just looks really bad, and I just can't come up with any super good faith reasoning behind doing this. And so it makes you turn to cynical reasoning, right? The cynical reasoning being they're trying to pull some shenanigans in the midterms or the general election, or set up the conditions by which they're able to pull some shenanigans, right? Give themselves the runway to do so. So I don't know. We'll see what comes of this. They said they're going to fill these seats, but I have a hard time believing that. And like I said before, I'm not trying to give bad people good ideas, but I don't know necessarily what would prevent them from filling the seats with, like, if they have a majority in the Senate, filling those seats with 2 Republicans and like 2 Tea Party members, and calling the Tea Party technically a different party, or 2 Libertarian Party members, or whatever it may be.